कॉन्फ्रेंस में बात करना चाहिए। संजीव प्रारंभ करिए भाई।
नमस्कार भाई। आज के हमारे इस अभिनव में और इस कार्यक्रम में सम्मिलित सभी का मैं प्रथमतः स्वागत करता हूं। हमारे इस कार्यक्रम का प्रयोजन और इसका उद्देश्य क्या है, यह जानना यहाँ पर महत्वपूर्ण होगा। हमारा यह कार्यक्रम इंडियन नॉलेज सिस्टम यानी भारतीय ज्ञान परंपरा तथा AICTE इनके संयुक्त तत्वावधान से हो रहा है। भारतीय ज्ञान परंपरा, इसका परिचय यहाँ देने की मुझे विशेष आवश्यकता नहीं है, क्योंकि हमारे आज तक हुए वेबिनार और आज भी हमारे सामने उपस्थित सभी विद्वज्जन इसके बारे में हमें बहुत सारी जानकारी देने वाले हैं और दे चुके हैं। हमारी प्राचीन ऋषि मुनियों की परंपरा जहाँ थी तो वैदिक विज्ञान, वैदिक धर्म शिक्षा आदि अनेक सारे तथ्य हैं जो हमें मूलभूत रूप से और बड़े विस्तृत रूप से भी दिखाई देते हैं। आवश्यकता है वह केवल उनके ऊपर चिंतन करने की और उन तथ्यों को सामने लाने की। जैसे कि गीता में कहा गया है, ज्ञानम विज्ञान सहितम यद ज्ञात्वा मोक्षसे शुभात्। को विद्या के साथ हमें सबके सामने लाना चाहिए, तभी वह हमारे लिए मोक्ष का कारण होगा। तो आइए इसी वचनों के साथ आज वेबिनार को प्रारंभ करते हैं। वेबिनार में माननीय श्री नवनीत सोनी जी तथा हमारे आज के प्रमुख वक्ता श्री नीलेश ओक जी, इनका मैं सहर्ष स्वागत करता हूं। इसी के साथ हमारे साथ आज उपस्थित इंडियन नॉलेज सिस्टम भारतीय ज्ञान परंपरा के चीफ कोऑर्डिनेटर श्री AB शुक्ला जी तथा AICTE हमारे चेयरमैन श्री सहस्रबुद्धे जी, इनका भी मैं सविनय और सहर्ष स्वागत करता हूं। तथा इस वेबिनार से जुड़े हमारे सभी दर्शक, सभी अध्यापक, सभी विद्वज्जन और सभी छात्र मैं यहाँ पर। गत कुछ महीनों से विविध विषयों पर हमने वेबिनार की एक श्रृंखला चलाई। इससे अनेक शास्त्रों के अनेक वैज्ञानिक तथ्य हमारे सामने आए। आज का भी हमारा विषय यह इस ज्ञान परंपरा से जुड़ा एक बहुत महत्वपूर्ण विषय है। इसका नाम है क्रिटिकल एग्जामिनेशन रेटिंग्स ऑफ रामायण एंड महाभारत। इस विषय की पार्श्वभूमि तथा इस विषय में विशेष रूप से शुभकामना देने के लिए मैं आज के हमारे प्रमुख श्री नवनीत सोनी जी को निवेदन करता हूं। तत्पूर्व हमारे IK निवेदन करता हूं कि उनका परिचय करें।
संजीव, अनम्यूट योरसेल्फ, अनम्यूट करो अपने को। हाँ,
नमस्कारेभ्यः। आज हमारे मुख्य अतिथि श्रीमान नवनीत सोनी जी का परिचय करते हुए मुझे अत्यंत हर्ष महसूस हो रहा है। आपका परिचय में आप 1988 बैच के IAS ऑफिसर हैं। वर्तमान में आप कमिश्नर ऑफ इनकम टैक्स भोपाल में कार्यरत है। इनकम टैक्स आयकर विभाग के विभिन्न पदों में जैसे मुंबई, दिल्ली, उत्तर प्रदेश, मध्य प्रदेश आदियों में आपने अपनी सेवाएं दी है और संस्कृति मंत्रालय में 10 साल तक आपने डिप्टी सेक्रेटरी, डायरेक्टर और जॉइंट सेक्रेटरी के रूप में अपने कार्यभार संभाला है। उसी के साथ और खेल, यूथ अफेयर्स, संस्कृति, पर्यटन और नागरिक उड्डयन मंत्रालयों के मंत्री के PS और OSD के रूप में भी आपने पदभार संभाला है। और मुख्य रूप से आप 5 साल तक भारतीय राष्ट्रीय स्मारक प्राधिकरण नेशनल मॉन्यूमेंट अथॉरिटी ऑफ इंडिया के सदस्य सचिव के रूप में भी रहे हैं। इसके अतिरिक्त अंतर्राष्ट्रीय स्तर के यात्राओं का भी आपका समृद्ध अनुभव रहा है, जिसमें आपने संयुक्त राज्य अमेरिका, कनाडा, ब्रिटेन, फ्रांस, रूस, तुर्की, यूगोस्लाविया, पाकिस्तान, सिंगापुर, हांगकांग, दक्षिण कोरिया, ऑस्ट्रेलिया, न्यूजीलैंड इत्यादि देशों में व्यापक रूप से भी आपने यात्राएं की और यात्राओं का आपका समृद्ध एक अनुभव रहा है। इसके अतिरिक्त भी देखा जाए तो आप इतिहास, संस्कृति, संगीत, कविता, धर्म, ज्योतिष इत्यादि शास्त्रों में गहरी अपनी रुचि रखते हैं। आज हम अपने आप को अत्यंत सौभाग्य समझते हैं कि आप आज हमारे बीच में उपस्थित हैं। हम आपसे निवेदन करते हैं कि इस वेबिनार में आप अपना मुख्य आतिथ्य भाषण देकर के हम सभी को अनुग्रहित करेंगे, मार्गदर्शन देंगे।
संजीव जी, एक मिनट के लिए आपने वो परिचय पढ़ दिया जो कागज पर है। कबीर जी कहते हैं कि लेखा लेखी की बात नहीं, बात है देखा देखी की। यानी जब आप अनुभव करते हैं, जो अनुभूति सत्य होता है वो सत्य होता है, जो कागज पे लिखा हुआ तो साधारण होता है। तो नवनीत सोनी जी का परिचय आप एक कागज के माध्यम से, प्रिंसिपल कमिश्नर इनकम टैक्स के माध्यम से या मेंबर सेक्रेटरी एनएमएस से नहीं दे सकते। इनके इस विशाल व्यक्तित्व के पीछे छुपा हुआ ये कलाकार, एक दार्शनिक, एक चिंतक है, वो इनकी विशेषता है। आज यहाँ पर हमको इसलिए बुलाया गया है कि एक चिंतक है। और नॉर्मली होता क्या, ब्यूरोक्रेसी में रहने के बाद आदमी सिर्फ अपने रुतबे में डूब कर रहता है। सोनी जी विनम्रता की पहचान है। उन्होंने कहा तुलसीदास है, बरसहि जलधि भूमि निराए, जथा नवहि बुध विद्या पाए। जिसके जितनी विद्या है उतनी विनम्रता है। तो सोनी जी विनम्रता की प्रतिमूर्ति है। अधिक समय नहीं लेते हुए मैं सोनी जी से अनुरोध करूंगा कि अपना वक्तव्य प्रारंभ करें। धन्यवाद।
आप सबका बहुत बहुत धन्यवाद संजीव जी। आज इस वेबिनार में अपने आप को मैं बहुत ही गौरवान्वित महसूस कर रहा हूं कि मुझे मेरे फ्रेंड, फिलोसोफर और गाइड श्री ए.बी. शुक्ला जी ने मुझे ये सौभाग्य प्रदान किया कि मैं आज इस वेबिनार की अध्यक्षता कर रहा हूं। जीवन में बचपन से रामायण और महाभारत तो भारत में रहने वाले हर बच्चे को उसकी माँ से प्राप्त होता है उसका ज्ञान, और सबसे पहले माँ ही कान में राम और कृष्ण की लीलाएं सुनाती है, और तब से बच्चा जैसे जैसे बड़ा होता है उन चीजों को आत्मसात करता हुआ बड़ा होता है। ये बहुत बड़े चिंतन का विषय है कि क्या रामायण और महाभारत एक मिथ है या हिस्ट्री है। और इस विषय को लेके अनेक लोगों ने बहुत प्रयास किए और बहुत रिसर्च की। इंडियन रेवेन्यू सर्विस का एक यूनिक सौभाग्य है, क्योंकि बहुत से लोग इंडियन रेवेन्यू सर्विस के और इनकम टैक्स डिपार्टमेंट के भारत के इस विषय से जुड़े रहे। पहली बार जब मुझे ये सौभाग्य प्राप्त हुआ कि मैं डेपुटेशन पर कल्चर मिनिस्ट्री में, संस्कृति मंत्रालय में आया 1999 में, तो उस समय 2001 में जब मैं वहां पर डायरेक्टर फाइनेंस था तो इनकम टैक्स विभाग के एक सज्जन मुझे मिले। उनका नाम था डॉक्टर राम अवतार शर्मा। डॉक्टर राम अवतार शर्मा राजभाषा में इनकम टैक्स विभाग में कार्यरत थे और वो रिसर्च कर रहे थे कि भगवान राम 2 बार अयोध्या निकले, एक बार विश्वामित्र जी के साथ और दूसरी बार जब वो वनगमन गए, और उन्होंने दोनों उनकी यात्राओं को ट्रेस किया, वो कहाँ गए और कौन कौन सी जगह पर गए। इन जगहों के उस समय वाल्मीकि रामायण और तुलसी रामचरितमानस में क्या नाम है, आज उनके क्या नाम है, और उन्होंने एक ग्रंथ पब्लिश किया जिसका नाम था जित जित चरण पड़े रघुवर के। वो मेरे पास आए और उन्होंने कहा कि इस कार्य के लिए मुझे क्या सहायता मिल सकती है। तो हमने उनसे कहा कि ये तो बहुत बढ़िया कार्य है और आप कल्चर विभाग के संस्कृति मंत्रालय की जो स्कीम्स हैं उनमें अप्लाई कीजिए और आपको वित्तीय सहायता जरूर मिलेगी। उसके बाद दूसरा जो एक अवसर आया जब मैं दूसरी बार कल्चर मंत्रालय में 2014 में आया, तब श्रीमती सरोज बाला हमसे मिली। श्रीमती सरोज बाला इंडियन रेवेन्यू सर्विस की 1972 बैच की ऑफिसर हैं और मेंबर सीबीडीटी से रिटायर हुई। जिस समय मेरा 88 बैच है और जब मैंने ज्वाइन किया नेशनल एकेडमी ऑफ डायरेक्ट टैक्सेस नागपुर 9 जनवरी 1989 को, तो उस समय श्रीमती सरोज बाला वहां पे डिप्टी डायरेक्टर एडमिनिस्ट्रेशन थी। तो सर्विस की पहले दिन से ही मेरी उनसे जान पहचान है और रिटायरमेंट के बाद उन्होंने इस विषय पे, जो आज का हमारा विषय है इस वेबिनार का, उस पे उन्होंने अपना शोध कार्य आरंभ किया और आई सर्व करके जो संस्था है उसकी वो डायरेक्टर हैं और उन्होंने जो अपनी किताब पब्लिश करी उसमें उन्होंने वाल्मीकि रामायण से एस्ट्रोलॉजिकल रेफरेंसेस ली और उनको साइंटिफिक वे में एक्सप्लेन करने का प्रयास किया और उन्होंने इसमें प्लैनेटेरियम गोल्ड और स्टेलेरियम सॉफ्टवेयर का इस्तेमाल किया और स्काई व्यूज जनरेट किए उन अलग अलग इवेंट्स के जो वाल्मीकि रामायण में जिनके बारे में बताया गया है और उस समय की एस्ट्रोनॉमिकल और ग्रहों की जो पोजीशन थी उसको लेकर उन्होंने एक डेट निकाली जो तकरीबन 7000 साल पहले की है कि राम का जन्म तकरीबन आज से 7000 साल पहले हुआ होगा। अब इसमें उन्होंने साइंटिफिक तरीके से जो कुछ भी प्रूव करने की कोशिश करी, उसमें चाहे वो आर्कियोलॉजी की सहायता ली गई, जियोलॉजी की ली गई, एस्ट्रोनॉमी की ली गई, ज्योग्राफी की ली गई, ओशियानोग्राफी की ली गई, बोटेनिकल साइंसेस की ली गई और इस प्रकार से वो एक डेट पर पहुंची। ये जो उनका कार्य था, एक और सज्जन थे जो खुद आईआरएस ऑफिसर थे 1986 बैच के, जिनका नाम था पुष्कर भटनागर। वो मेरे सीनियर थे और पुष्कर भटनागर जी की असामयिक डेथ हुई। वो सर्विस में थे और यंग एज में चले गए, लेकिन उन्होंने बड़ी पतली सी एक किताब इसी प्रकार की लिखी थी जिसमें वाल्मीकि रामायण के वर्सेस में से एस्ट्रोनॉमिकल रेफरेंसेस लेके और उस पे रिसर्च की गई थी कि रामायण की डेटिंग क्या हो सकती है। उसके बाद जब मेरा सेकंड स्टिंट था कल्चर मिनिस्ट्री में, तो 2015 में मुझे वेदवीर आर्या जी मिले। संस्कृति मंत्रालय में आकर उन्होंने अपनी किताब मुझको दी, क्रोनोलॉजी ऑफ एंशिएंट इंडिया, और उसमें उन्होंने आईसर्व की और श्रीमती सरोज बाला जी की रिसर्च का भी जिक्र किया है और उसमें उन्होंने जो लिखा है कि श्रीमती सरोज बाला की रिसर्च का निष्कर्ष एक डेट पर जाकर फिक्स हुआ कि 10 जनवरी 5114 बीसीई ये श्री राम की जन्म तिथि निकलती है। लेकिन इसके अलावा उन्होंने और भी अपनी किताब में, जब इंट्रोडक्शन उन्होंने अपनी किताब में लिखा, तो उसमें उन्होंने कुछ ऐसा लिखा जो मुझे बड़ा इंटरेस्टिंग लगा। एक पैराग्राफ जो मैं पढ़ देता हूं, आई कोट हिम। Puranas are the ancient chronicles of India that recorded the chronology of royal dynasties, starting from the earliest king Ikshvaku of Suryavansh. Interestingly, Pliny the Elder, 23 to 79 CE, mentions that from the time of Father Liber's to Alexander's, 153 kings of India are counted in a period of 6,451 years and 3 months. Thus, the chronological history of Indian royal dynasties goes back to 6,776 BCE. The first Suryavanshi king Ikshvaku probably flourished around 6,800 to 6,700 BC. तो उन्होंने अपने तरीके से जो रिसर्च की और जो प्रयास किए, उन्होंने एक अपना निष्कर्ष बनाया। फाइनली आज के जो मुख्य वक्ता है नीलेश नीलकंठ ओक जी, इनका एक पेपर पब्लिश हुआ। मेरी अभिन्न मित्र है नीरा मिश्रा जी, द्रौपदी ट्रस्ट की। उन्होंने एक इंटरनेशनल सेमिनार ऑर्गेनाइज कराया था और 2 वॉल्यूम में वो रिसर्च पेपर्स पब्लिश हुए। महाभारत मंथन उसका नाम था और इसमें एक पेपर नीलेश ओक जी ने और अपर्णा धीर जी ने मिलकर लिखा था, जिसमें उन्होंने एस्ट्रोनॉमिकल ऑब्जर्वेशंस ऑफ द महाभारत उसके बारे में बताया। और एक बड़ी इंटरेस्टिंग चीज जो उन्होंने बताई कि महाभारत में 215 एस्ट्रोनॉमिकल ऑब्जर्वेशंस या रेफरेंसेस हैं। उन्होंने ये भी उस पेपर में लिखा कि भीष्म निर्वाण से संबंधित 23 या 23 से ज्यादा एस्ट्रोनॉमिकल ऑब्जर्वेशंस हैं महाभारत में। और जहां ज्यादातर रिसर्च स्कॉलर्स महाभारत का जो युद्ध हुआ उसको 4000 से 5000 साल की डेटिंग देते हैं, नीलेश ओक जी ने अपनी एक्सटेंसिव रिसर्च के बेसिस पे और जो एस्ट्रोनॉमिकल रेफरेंसेस उन्होंने बताई कि 215 महाभारत में दी हुई हैं, उनके एग्जामिनेशन के बाद जो ईयर निकाला वॉर ऑफ महाभारत का, तो वो निकाला 5561 BC। और एक बड़ी इंटरेस्टिंग चीज उन्होंने इस पेपर में लिखी जो मुझे बड़ी बहुत बहुत अच्छी लगी, और उन्होंने ये एनालॉजी दी कि अप्रोक्सीमेटली राइट और प्रिसाइसली एक्यूरेट। और इसमें उन्होंने वर्नियर कैलिपर के यूज के बारे में बताया कि अगर जो गेंद है जो टेस्ट मैच में यूज होती है, बोर्ड ऑफ कंट्रोल फॉर क्रिकेट इन इंडिया उसके मानक के मुताबिक उसके डायमीटर को अगर जो है वो आप मापिए वर्नियर स्केल से, वर्नियर कैलिपर से, तो उन्होंने कहा कि उसके क्लिप्स अगर आप सही तरीके से नहीं लगाएंगे तो जो आपका अप्रोक्सीमेट राइट आएगा वो भी सही नहीं होगा, और जो फाइनर वर्नियर स्केल पे आप रीडिंग पढ़ेंगे वो तो डेफिनेटली रॉन्ग आएगी। और उसको फिर उन्होंने इस प्रकार एक्सप्लेन किया कि अगर ज्यादातर स्कॉलर भीष्म के निर्माण की जो तिथि है उसको 1, 2 या 5 एस्ट्रोनॉमिकल रेफरेंसेस से वैलिडेट करने का प्रयास करेंगे तो वो निष्कर्ष शायद उतना सही नहीं बैठेगा। तो उन्होंने अपना प्रयास जो किया है, आज उसी को सुनने के लिए हम लोग बैठे हैं। ये इतना वास्ट एक सब्जेक्ट है, डेटिंग ऑफ रामायण एंड महाभारत, और इसमें इतनी कंट्रोवर्सीज है। इसमें आर्कियोलॉजी का अपना पॉइंट ऑफ व्यू है, जेनेटिक्स एंथ्रोपोलॉजी का अपना पॉइंट ऑफ व्यू है, और एस्ट्रोनॉमी का अपना जो है एक स्थान है। लेकिन साइंस के सभी आयामों को जोड़कर जिस निष्कर्ष पर हमको पहुंचना है, उसमें मुझे लगता है कि आज के जो मुख्य वक्ता हैं उन्होंने यूनिक कार्य किया है। इसलिए बहुत समय न लेते हुए मैं अब आज का फ्लोर जो है उनके लिए ओपन करता हूं, क्योंकि हम सभी का ज्ञानवर्धन होगा। उन्होंने जो रिसर्च की है और जो उन्होंने वैलिडेशन दी है अपने रिसर्च की, उससे हमको अवगत कराएं। तो नीलेश जी, द फ्लोर इज ओपन टू यू नाउ। Thank you so much. I thank everybody once again, including my good friend, my guide and philosopher, and my former colleague in National Monument Authority, Shri Aryabhushan Shukla ji, for giving me this opportunity. Thank you.
धन्यवाद सोनी जी। आपके अमूल्य मार्गदर्शन एवं इस वक्तव्य के लिए हम आईकेएस की तरफ से आपको धन्यवाद देते हैं। जो विषय की पार्श्वभूमि होनी चाहिए थी और हमारे दर्शकों को आज के गहन विषय के पूर्व अलग अलग विद्वानों के मत और जो पार्श्वभूमि बननी चाहिए थी, वो सटीक तरीके से आपने हमारे मन में बना दी है। और मैं विश्वास के साथ यह कह सकता हूँ कि आज के सत्र का वक्तव्य अभी हमें जो आगे मिलने वाला है, वो हमें बहुत उचित तरीके से उसका लाभ होगा। इसका श्रेय भी आपको है, इसलिए पुनः एक बार धन्यवाद देता हूँ। और आज के जो हमारे प्रमुख वक्ता है माननीय नीलेश ओक जी, उनका परिचय देने के लिए मैं अनुराग जी से निवेदन करता हूँ कि वे उनका परिचय दें।
धन्यवाद श्रेयस जी। नीलेश नीलकंठ ओक जी, आप सुप्रसिद्ध इंडोलॉजिस्ट है। आपने केमिकल इंजीनियरिंग में बीएस एवं एमएस किया है। उसके उपरांत आपने एग्जीक्यूटिव एमबीए किया है। आप एक कुशल लेखक है। भारतीय इतिहास की कालगणना में आपकी विशेष रुचि है। इतना ही नहीं, एस्ट्रोनॉमी, आर्कियोलॉजी, जियोलॉजी, जेनेटिक्स, क्वांटम मैकेनिक्स, इकोनॉमिक्स, एंशिएंट नैरेटिव्स और फिलॉसफी, इन विषयों में भी आपकी रुचि है। आपने अपने प्रभावी पुस्तकों के लेखन कर उन्हें प्रकाशित किया है, जैसे When Did the Mahabharat War Happen? The Mystery of Arundhati, जो आपने 2011 में प्रकाशित किया था। उसके उपरांत द हिस्टोरिक रामा। तत्पश्चात आपने भीष्म निर्वाण यह पुस्तक का लेखन किया, जो अतीव लोकप्रिय है। आपने 12,209 BCE राम रावण युद्ध भी प्रकाशित की, जिससे आपने रामायण का काल निर्धारित किया था। ऐसे अनेक विषयों के परिप्रेक्ष्य में आपका अभ्यास चल रहा है और भारत के इतिहास के विषय में आप सदैव समाज तक वह विषय प्राधिकृत रूप से पहुंचाने के लिए तत्पर रहते हैं। हमारा सौभाग्य है कि आज हमें क्रिटिकल एग्जामिनेशन डेटिंग ऑफ रामायण एंड महाभारत इस विषय पर आपको सुनने का अवसर प्राप्त हुआ है। मैं नीलेश ओक जी से निवेदन करता हूं कि का वक्तव्य आप करें। धन्यवाद।
Namaskar everyone. Namaskar Anurag ji. Namaskar Navneet Soni ji. As Anurag said, I second what he said about your good summary. You created a wonderful background and a nice, beautiful segue. You made my presentation easy for me to do. In fact, some of the specific things that you covered, and I was very impressed, I should say. Not surprising. That something that happened long time ago, you have your very detailed notes of that. For example, Mahabharat Manthan, and I couldn't be there, and so my colleague, Dr. Aparna Dheer, presented. My thanks to Shukla ji and also Anil ji, and I'm going to miss many names, so my thanks to everyone who is there. Also. Shreyash ji also, I was going to say something about what Shreyash ji said, but now I forgot. Pardon my gray hair, okay? All right. So I'm going to start sharing the presentation. And anytime a speaker begins, people always wonder, how long this individual is going to talk. So as a guideline, I'm going to say I'm going to talk for 45 minutes, maybe 50 minutes. So you have some idea as to, and then if we have a time, we will get into questions, answer, comments, and objections also. This is also Manthan. So Neera Mishra ji did organize this conference on Mahabharata Manthan. This is also Manthan, and you think of a Samudra Manthan, and remember Samudra Manthan, it gives rise to everything. Okay, so first, I mean, a lot of things came, but one of the thing was a poison that also came, and then Amrut. Okay, so it is part of the thing, and this discussion or these different claims are to be taken in an extremely positive fashion, because that is our tradition of a Vada. All our Darshana Shastra talk about the format, a very specific, very crisp, very clear format, how a discussion, how a Vada should be conducted. In fact, I mean, we are always willing to take anything good from anywhere that comes. That is our tradition. Having said that, there is such a solid foundation in our Darshan Shastra and of course rest of the Adhyatma Shastra that it provides us a very nice path to arrive at the truth. Just 2 days ago, we celebrated Adi Shankaracharya and his Jayanti. And Shankaracharya has, that's where I was going to talk of Shreyasji. Shreyasji quoted something from Bhagavad Gita, very beautiful, that Jnana and Vijnana, you bring it together, and that is how we can achieve moksha. Now, I'm not going to take any of you through a very technical details of astronomy today, but on a humorous note, I will also mention that Varahamir says, unless you comprehend astronomy, you cannot have a moksha. And that just shows his fascination, attachment, passion for astronomy. So again, as our subject is critical examination, dating of the Mahabharata and Ramayana. So let me begin with that, with permission from all of you. So where it all began for me, okay? So I'm a voracious reader right from the beginning. I grew up in a small village on the west coast of India, in the Konkan, for the first 15 years. My both parents were teachers, primary teachers. We lived in a small village, and there was no TV there then. I mean, there was a TV, but there was no TV in my village. The radio was as close as we got by directly connecting to rest of the world. A newspaper might show up. So reading was the only form of entertainment, and I think I naturally liked it. Now, when I read whatever I could read then and afterwards, I could sense the works around the world talking deep antiquity of the world. Okay, now granted, there was a Western European view for a long time, almost literally until 70 years ago. Many of them still believe, possibly, that the whole world or the earth began in like 4000 BC. But that view is going away or gone away with uh, Darwin's theory and what we now know of geology and different sciences, astronomy, and so on. Yet I found very few talk of antiquity of Indian civilization. What I mean is that may talk of antiquity of Indian civilization, but the timeline they will talk about is extremely restricted. And I wondered, why is that? Now, I'm going to fast forward to say around early 90s, 1995, for example. A number of you might have heard this name or might have read this book, Fingerprints of the Gods by Graham Hancock. He's a British journalist and now British researcher. He has done a lot of research in India, around the world. And so that book came around 1995. I was in Canada at that time, just had completed my master's. And of course, I was studying Bhagavad Gita and I was studying a few other things. But this particular book also surprised me because there is evidence, even when not a solid evidence, as much as it is available in India, and that might be surprise to many. Even then, there is evidence around the world that talks of deep antiquity. Now, if we go back some 125 years ago, even Bal Gangadhar Tilak, who was still working under, because the world was still believing into this whole, I will use a very polite word, the nonsense of Aryan invasion theory. So he had, because that was the paradigm then. But even then he had shown, or he had at least claimed, we can say, because some of the things, some of the conclusions are no longer true. We can verify that. But that the Vedas are definitely more than 4500 BC, that he did with another book called Orion. Then with the Arctic home in the Vedas, forget the Arctic home part for now. But he showed the Rig Veda definitely alludes to 6000 BC, 8000 BC, 10,000 BC, and he had made many other predictions. Okay, so some people did talk about it, but now people talk of archaeology, and then they say, where is the archaeological evidence for agriculture? Where is the archaeology evidence for civilization? Well, guess what? I'll talk about Indian archaeology evidence for agriculture in a minute. But what we call today Israel, okay, just on the Mediterranean, that area, just north of Egypt, in the last century, a culture was found that is known, goes by the name Natufian culture. I don't know how many of you know it. There is a sufficient archaeological evidence that it goes back to 15,000 to 11,000 BP, which is to say 13,000 BC or around that time. Now, in the note, they say the culture was unusual. Now, that's not correct. I'll tell you why they say that. In that, it supported a sedentary or semi-sedentary population. In short, they're saying the agriculture existed. But they say even before the introduction of agriculture. Now, this has nothing to do with the evidence. This has to do with the Tarka Shastra. Because somebody thought somewhere in the book it's done that agriculture only began at a certain point, let's say 5000 BC, whatever that number is. Now, when you actually find the evidence of agriculture, people are saying, so these guys were settled just like agriculture, but before the introduction of agriculture. This is a problem of Tarka Shastra. Why not recognize that actually agriculture existed in that area 15,000 years ago? When you come to the Indian subcontinent, I don't know how many people know it. There are peer-reviewed papers. There is evidence of agriculture going back to Indian subcontinent to 16,000 BC. And listen to this, at least a harvesting of wild grains. It's not very clear because as you go back in the past, the evidence gets scanty, less and less. For at least harvesting and storage and cooking of grains in Indian subcontinent goes back to 43,000 BC. How many people know that? How many people know that this is in the peer-reviewed paper? Okay, so 15,000 in Israel, we have agriculture. These are the things, archaeological things found from this Natufian culture that I told you. If you go to a village in India right now, you will find almost all of these, what you are seeing in the picture in a small village in India, even a remote village in India, agriculture-based society. Okay, these are jewelries that are put on like a mummified images, and the other one that you see is a fossil of a lady, and what the way it was buried, that what she's wearing is a, you can call the waistband made out of the fox nails, as a jewelry object. So on the other side, I want to take you for a second so that archaeology is out of the way for us. Japan. Okay, now they have something called Hormone Pottery, Hormone culture. And for a long time, the West was not willing to accept the antiquity of it. But Japan government has done a very good job. The Japanese culture, as such, they have done a good job. And precisely for that reason, that dating is into Wikipedia, but that you will not see for the antiquity of Indian civilization. So, and the connection of Japan with the Ecuador across the Pacific. Okay, these are the kind of potteries we are talking. It's called Hormone Pottery. It's not a surprise. I mean, I read about this in late 80s, early 90s. Now, this pottery I'm showing you is from actually Ecuador. And the experts in that area know that these are perfectly connected with that Japanese pottery. Both are called now Hormone Pottery. Even notice the eyes of this doll that is found in Ecuador going back to some 5,000, 6,000, 7,000 years ago. Even you can notice the eyes matching with the Japanese eyes. Okay, there was that connection and a trade and communication. And the timing for this goes back to different layers of civilization. Hormone Pottery goes back all the way to 14,000 BC, all the way to 1500 BC. Quickly, if you go to Peru, South America, there is evidence for going back to 20,000 BC. If you go to Amazon, the same thing. If you go to Chile, the same thing, going back to 33,000 BC, human habitation. If you go to Panama, 50,000 BC. I mean, these are the papers in last 30 years. Now, quick summary of my research work, and then we'll get into specifics of Ramayana and Mahabharata. This is some I started sometime in the early 90s. What you say is the middle axis of time, going from Mahakala, like Ujjain has a Mahakala, from minus infinity to plus infinity. But when we talk of history or a specific civilization, we have to think of or talk of Khandakal. It has to start somewhere, somewhat arbitrary, and it has to stop somewhere. And how do we decide where we start and where we stop? Well, we decide based on the evidence. If the new evidence comes up, then we are willing to extend or shrink, usually extend the timeline as the evidence comes. So today is where we are, 21st century. Zero is if you go back like a Gregorian calendar, 2000 years. And if you go further back, that minus 5K refers to minus 5,000, which is what, 5,000 BCE, or that means approximately 7,000 years ago. 10,000 minus 10K, 10,000 BC, that's approximately 12,000 BC, 12,000 BC, sorry, 10,000 BC, that's 12,000 years ago, and so on. I started with both Ramayana, Mahabharata, few other things. My interest was in Bhagavad Gita. But the first thing that I succeeded, and Navneet ji mentioned that, he mentioned about Bhishma Nirvana. I don't know if in that presentation we talked about Arundhati Vasishta, but I started with one observation, and that actually led to the whole thing. And I'll briefly discuss that. But in 2009 or so, I could determine, taking all the evidence, that 5561 BC is the year of Mahabharat War. Interestingly, this is the year that was also identified as possibly the year of Mahabharat War, going back 1980s by one great medical doctor, Dr. P.V. Vartak, who was based in Pune for a long time. And he did experimentation in many different areas, just like most of the revolutionary scientists do. I mean, we know when we think of Newton or Einstein or Kepler, we only know about the circular orbits to elliptical orbits or gravity or relativity. But in reality, each of these individuals worked in every single area of science you can actually name. All right. So, so he had done that, but from a very different point of view. I'm not going to discuss that today. It's in my book. So 5561 BC as the year of Mahabharat War. I did the same thing starting with Valmiki Ramayana and extracted all possible evidence, not limited to astronomy. However, what I'm showing you here, that arrival at 5561 BC initially was based on astronomy evidence. Same thing for Valmiki Ramayana. So 12,209 BC, I arrived as the year of Ram Ravan Yuddha, or 5561 BC as the Mahabharat War year, based on astronomy evidence. Then very recently, Professor Balram Singh, who I work with here, who is at Institute of Advanced Sciences in Dartmouth, Massachusetts, close to Boston. He asked me in 2016, I was invited for the International Saraswati Conference in Kurukshetra. And so he asked me if I would work on Rigveda. Now, I had done some work related to Saraswati based on Mahabharata and Ramayana references. Together, Mahabharata Ramayana has more than 200 descriptions of Saraswati. Anyways, so I took those references and connected that with the Rigveda references. One of a great researcher who has done a phenomenal job in terms of relative chronology of Rigveda, the internal mandalas, is Sri Shrikant Talagiri. I took his work for relative chronology, and then my work, including the geology evidence of Saraswati, and that gave this broad timeline for Rigveda. Definitely the last portions are contemporary with Mahabharata times. Remember, Vyasadeva edited, recasted the Vedas. That's why we have Shantanu Devapi references in Rigveda 10th mandala. We also have a reference to Rama, Pruthu and Vena, okay? Because the 6th millennium is when they are edited. Some of the things are added, modified. Modified in the sense new things were added. But if you look at Saraswati evidence, definitely we don't know how far back, definitely it's older than 24,000 years, okay, Rigveda. That is not the subject today. Since then, which is since 2011 or so, I have looked at every possible evidence. If a discipline of science exists, and if evidence exists, and if it can be connected in some fashion with the internal descriptions of Ramayana, Mahabharata, or Rigveda, I have tried to see if it can validate or conflict or contradict or falsify these claims. And to this day, I have found thousands and thousands of empirical, objectively testable data points from multiple different disciplines of science. And all of them, either they support, like in scientific language, we use the word corroborate, like tend to support, or they have nothing to say on this because we cannot connect that data point with any descriptions of these texts. But it has not contradicted anything to this day. Okay? Now, just to give you a context, think of European Enlightenment, and European Enlightenment, one of the big reasons was their access to the knowledge from India, but that's not a subject today. European Enlightenment, by their own definition, came around the 17th century. And many good things came out of it. Okay, some of the great things of modern science and technology came out of it. Now, one of the things which was a disaster for Indian history writing came out of that was this whole nonsense of Aryan invasion theory. It's not even a theory. And if I had a time, I would go into it, but maybe in the question answer. And I have given a plenary speech at IIT Chennai a few years ago at one of the conferences on what falsifies Aryan invasion theory. Now, why I'm saying you this, why I'm showing you this, because there is a good reason. What has happened is, while many of our Indic researchers understand the futility and the invalidity of this whole Aryan invasion thing, some of the things that Aryan invasion brought into the psyche of many of our researchers, many of our academics, many of our researchers, both inside and outside India, not just Indian, okay, non-Indian researchers, that has still lingered. While the rest of the world is going by the empirical evidence and taking the antiquity wherever it shows based on the evidence, we, as even the Indic researchers, for majority, I would say, we are still stuck into this, I would say, last 10,000 years. We almost see some kind of a barrier, even though the evidence is so rich, super rich, we cannot seem to cross that barrier, like a sound barrier, we cannot seem to cross. So most of the researcher you will see, if you say something for Indian civilization that's more than 10,000 years old, they start appearing nervous, okay? And my assertion is that partly it is the reason of the brainwashing that has happened over last 150, 200 years based on this Aryan invasion. So even when emotionally we get rid of Aryan invasion, we are still left in our mind with many of the paradigms, many of the false notions that Aryan invasion created, that our civilization is like 3,500 years old or less than 5,000 years old. Okay. Quickly, today's two subjects, Kurukshetra, that is where the Mahabharat War took place. Just in the name, we have a history of it. Now, timing we will get here. Sapta Saraswati is also the name you will see, just like Sapta Sindhu. Okay, that was the area of Kurukshetra. At the time of Parshuram, and I don't know what is that time of Parshuram. Of course, the Parshurams were many. They were there through Mahabharata times and Ramayana times, but we are referring to that specific Parshurama who got rid of the miscreants 21 times and whatever the story we hear. That time, this area of Kurukshetra was called as the Samanta Panchak, and the description comes in the Mahabharata. Then if you go to the Ramayana times, again, we are going to talk about specific dates. This area was known as a very broad area, not just Kurukshetra, as a Kuru jungle. You see the reference of that in Ramayana. And by the time of the Mahabharata, the name, of course, the place was known as a Kurukshetra. So my timing, so that everyone remembers what reference we are talking, the Mahabharata War, and Navneet ji mentioned it, and Shreyas ji also might have mentioned. 5561 BC. Easy way to remember is more than 7,500 years ago. If you look at Ramayana, again, 12,209 BC, simple way to remember, more than 14,000 years ago. Now, where is the evidence? Okay, just I'm going to show mostly through, say, Mahabharata, just to not jump ship from one text to another, one epic to another. But the methodology that I'm going to show you exactly applies to Ramayana, and just I'll give a quick summary of Ramayana. Evidence. Now, is there evidence? Well, yes. As it relates to the Mahabharat War, in the huge, daunting, overwhelming text of Mahabharata, 100,000 plus verses, we have a evidence about the Mahabharat War that can help us date the Mahabharat War, before the Mahabharat War, during the Mahabharat War, and after the Mahabharat War. What kind of evidence we have? If you look at the celestial, like just looking up at the sky, we have the evidence of stars, we have the evidence of planets, comets. I mean, there are not just these words, there are very specific positions of the stars, very specific orientation of the star, very specific conjunctions of the star with respect to nakshatra, of a comet with respect to specific nakshatra, the positions of the sun, the phases and positions of the moon, descriptions of season, lunar tithis, lunar months, solstices, equinoxes, eclipses, conjunction of planets, you name it, is super rich. And that's what goes to that 215 plus that Navneet referred to. Actually, since then, because Mahabharata is so huge that it's very easy to miss, and I've read through like 30 plus times during my that research, say 1995 to 2011, during those 17 years, and of course I continue to read it. But it is still possible that you may miss certain evidence. Now, if you look at the terrestrial evidence, not just evidence in the sky in the sense of astronomy, there is a huge evidence in both texts, Mahabharata, but also Ramayana. But I'm just talking here of a Mahabharata for now. There is the oceanography evidence that comes in the form of description of flooding and destruction of Dwarka, climatology in terms of the descriptions of the seasons and particular tithis and particular lunar months, seasons again connected with the lunar months. There's a geology evidence, geophysics evidence, archaeology evidence is like what we see in the description versus what we may or may not find. Hydrology evidence, again, huge, super rich evidence. Morphodynamics of rivers, how the rivers have changed their paths and which way they are flowing now versus then, versus before Mahabharata. Physical anthropology, genetics, something very interesting. I will not have a chance to go through each of these today, but maybe in a question answer, maybe in another session. Or I have given, just so that everyone knows, close to now, I don't know the exact number, but close to 500 plus talks, they are available on a YouTube. And I have given many more, but at least 400 plus are definitely available on the YouTube. So I cover a lot of these subjects individually through those talks. Now, outside Mahabharata, again, I think it was Navneet ji who mentioned when mentioning the work of Saroj Balaji or somewhere, or Pushkar Bhatnagarji, or maybe Vedvirareji, I forgot. Like there are references outside, like a Greek records, for example. I have talked about it. If in the question answer, I might do it. But even outside Mahabharata doesn't necessarily mean outside India. Like we have the Puranas. We have a genealogy records in Puranas. We have a chronology descriptions in Puranas. For example, between Mahapadmananda and Parikshit. Different Purana says different things. Now, we should not forget that. For example, what is the time duration between Mahapadmananda and Parikshit? We get different Puranas giving different numbers, which range from a lower of 1,050 years to a high of 3,310 years. I don't know how many people knew that. So like lower number from say Bhagavad Puran, and Bhagavad Puran itself has 2-3 different numbers, like 1050, 1150, 1500, Vishnu Puran says 1500, Matsya Puran, and so on, all the way to Skanda Puran, which says between these two, the period was 3,310 years. Okay, and then of course we need to decide the period of Mahapadmananda, then add 1050 or 3,310, and gives us an approximate timing of Mahabharata, not the exact timing. Travelers' records of visitors to India, contemporary civilization around the world, just like what I showed you. As I say, the most important task is not even the objective testing of it. Like yesterday, I was talking to another researcher in America, American guy, but he's very interested in Indian civilization. And he said, before he read my book, or even afterwards, he said he thought the objective testing was the toughest part, like showing something in the using astronomy software, or or finding the research about the Dwarka flooding. And then he realized now, and correctly so, that that is not the tough part, although it is not easy. But the toughest part is go through this vast source of our epics, Mahabharata or even Ramayana. That's not small. That's 24,000 verses, still huge. And then, of course, Harivamsha and Puranas. And then extracting the evidence depending on what specific scientific discipline you are studying. You cannot mix up scientific disciplines. And now that is sometimes mistake. Actually, most of the time the mistake is done. The evidence is overwhelming, it's vast, it's daunting, and until you put together as a jigsaw puzzle, it's conflicting, or at least it appears conflicting. So where does the evidence comes? On the left side, you are saying is Krishna and Karna sitting in the chariot as Krishna is coming from a failed peace mission back to Upaplavya to come meet with Pandavas, and he is making another statecraft there, trying, to see if Karna can come on this side. So that is that discussion. So right from Udyog Parva, we start seeing the references related to Mahabharat War, and they continue through all the Yuddha Parva, Bhishma Parva, Drona Parva, Karna Parva, Shalya Parva, Sauptik Parva, Stri Parva, but even afterwards to Shanti Parva, Anushasan Parva, where Bhishma passes away, but even there are references that are relevant going all the way to even Ashwamedhik Parva. So literally like 8, 9 big, huge Parva out of the 18 Parvas has these references. So I gave you the bounds, right from the Krishna Karna dialogue all the way to Bhishma Nirvana, we have these references, and actually beyond. Right during the Mahabharat War, like any time some big instance happens, you will see Vyasadeva and of course Ganesh, you can say Bhagwan Ganesh, getting into this and documenting many references, astronomy, but even otherwise. So we have this on the 13th day, Abhimanyu fighting and falling away. That 14th day, Jayadratha goes and the war continues through the night, and the Ghatotkacha is killed by Karna. Then we have a Karna killing on the 17th day of the war, and the 18th day, end of the day, that is when Bhim and Duryodhana are fighting. Just I'm giving you an idea, like anytime a key instance, key event, something like this happens, Vyasadeva, before the war, after the war, and during the war, is very keen, savvy in his magic. He's putting these references. But why they are daunting? Because remember, if you know the Katha of a Krishna, the Ganesh and thing, you can take it allegorically, you can take it literally, whichever way you like. The important point is, Mahabharata tells us when the Grantha was ready, how this Grantha looked. It says, Grantham Granthi Tada Chakre Munir Gudam Kutuhalat. This beautiful Grantha has lot of twist. That Granthi is full of curiosities, Kutuhalat, and Munir Gudam. There are many mysteries filled with this. Not just astronomy mysteries, mysteries of every kind, but including astronomy mysteries. Now, how by references? Which reference? People will ask, which Mahabharata did you refer to? Well, I refer to many Mahabharata, but one best Mahabharata to refer to is a critical edition. Now, remember, critical edition, I don't mean just what they have given at the top, but even the variations, which is to say they have collected every single manuscript they could have their hands on, and they note down all the variations, and all of them are important. Okay, again, I'm not going to take you into the details or the weeds today, but for example, this is in a Nevari script. You can see this is part of Bhishma Parva, Bhagavad Gita, in fact. Those of you, the student, Masanam, Margashurshoyam, right? Rutunam, Kusumakaram. You see, Nagari, you can, Nevari, this is Nevari. You can read that actually, if you know Bhagavad Gita backwards. How does the astronomy reference or any kind of reference looks like? Remember, this is a kavya, this is a arsha kavya, it's a poetry, it's a itihasa said in a arsha kavya form. That was easy to remember, and this is how the words would come. So now you need a certain glasses. So if you're looking for archaeology evidence, you need to look at those descriptions. If you're looking at astronomy evidence, you need those descriptions. So I'm just going to highlight you just to show you. For example, that reference is a reference. Ya Chaisha is an astronomy reference. Ya Chaisha Visuta Rajas Trailoke Sadhu Sammata Arundhati Taya Pesha Vasishta Prushtata Kruta. And the next one, if you see that verse 31, it shows all the possible variations that are seen in the different manuscripts of Mahabharata found around India or around the world. This is the one verse that I started researching on in around 1995. And lo and behold, in a scientific fashion, it took me 15 years, 2009, 8 May 2009, to demystify it in a scientific fashion, in the astronomy fashion. But when it actually did happen, it made the revolution. Now, just let me show you one more is there, because it's there. Rohini Pidayannesha Stito Rajashaneshchare Vyavrutta Lakshma Somasya Bhavishyati Mahadbayam. In that line, there are two references. That Saturn is doing Pida to Nakshatra Rohini, and the mark on the surface of the moon is covered, or is not very clearly visible, and so on. So maybe it's a time close to Amavasya or whatever else could be. Now, each of these can have a multiple interpretation, and that's not a problem for Indian tradition. However, Indian tradition demands that pratyaksha, so in fact, Krishna says in Bhagavad Gita, any one pramana is not enough. Like some great authority says something, a guru says something, a book says something, it's not enough. Krishna is saying, Shruti pratyaksham aitiyam anumanam chatushtayam pramaneshu anavasthanat vikalpat savirajyate. If you don't do the quadrangulation of Shruti, Pratyaksha, Aitiya, and Anuman, it will lead to delusion. It would lead to confusion. So all of this is required to be brought together. Okay. Now, how is this evidence? Just like I showed you two examples, you have to read through that, and you cannot get drawn into the interesting katha, because these are beautiful kathas, as I think Shuklaji mentioned at the beginning. They give us so much. It is like looking for a needle in a haystack. Okay, so that is 125,000 plus verses when we combine the northern edition and the southern edition, like a Kumbakonam edition. You can take any edition. Critical edition has all of these. Gita Press edition. You can start anywhere, but it's always important that you refer to any additional edition that you have, and actually it enriches our understanding of the evidence. So out of this, as I read, I'm looking also, if I'm looking for astronomy, I'm only looking for astronomy reference that I gave you the list. That is the initial number. When I did that in 2011, that was 215 plus. Since then, anytime either another Mahabharata researchers who might raise certain objections, well, if it is so, how is it so? Then I have to bring additional evidence to show, well, this is why it is. And some additional evidence that I found. One great writer, if you have heard the name Sai Swarupa Iyer, she has written books on the Rukmini and many others. So she was last year doing a detailed study of Mahabharata 18 Days War. And I requested her, she's my good friend, I requested her to do this. As she reads through whatever the reason she was reading it for, I said, if you come across any astronomy or hydrology type of references, please bring it to my attention. So she was bringing every point to my attention. This is only a year ago, maybe 2 years ago. And she brought to my attention close to 6-7 references, astronomy references. Guess what? That I had missed after reading this 30 plus times. That's what I am saying. It's like looking for a needle in a haystack. Anyways, so how do these observations look? Just like I read their two observations there, they come in the form of a nimitta. Now, nimitta many times people translate as a bad omen. That is one of the translation, omen, not just really bad omen, but it is also like a cause. It is also like a symbol. It is also like a sign. Like, Krishna also tells Arjun, I have killed all these guys, you just become a nimitta, So it comes in the form of a nimitta, like a science. It comes in the form of a upamana, like when the war is going on, they will use, Vyasadeva will use that upamana, alankar, embellishments to describe something, okay? Now, just to give you an idea of illustration of the complexity, Navneet mentioned it, Shuklaji mentioned it, and few others might have mentioned it. So as I said, once you clear through the evidence, then the objective testing can be challenging, but clearing the evidence is the most challenging part. I'm going to give you a few illustrations of that. This is actually Navneet referred to this word. I think I like to say, or Shuklaji. Now, please forgive me if I confuse or attach somebody else's name. That many people many Mahabharata researchers, I'm not talking ordinary people, but you ask them how long Bhishma was on the bed of arrows, you will hear the word 58 days. Almost all Mahabharata researchers will say that too. Is there a reason why they say that? Is there a evidence why they say that? Of course there is. This is this verse, guys. अष्टपञ्चाशतं रात्र शयनस्याद्य मेघता शरेषु निशिताग्रेषु यथा वर्षशतं तथा. So really, sometimes when it look like there is a argument or debate going on between two Mahabharata researchers, many times it is not so much the debate between them, but it is a debate between which evidence they are looking at from the Mahabharata text. Now, let me give you the context of this. But before I do that, let me, and Navneet mentioned that 23 observations for Bhishma Nirvana, those 23 are here, or actually only 6 are required. But when people raise certain objections, then I say, hey, here is the answer to that. So that added up to 23. Then, since Navneet, when you listen to it, many people raise additional objections. Guess what? Every time they raise objections, the beauty of Mahabharata is it provides the answers. So now that list of 23 is not really required. Only 6 are sufficient. But if somebody objects in a certain fashion, then you have to respond using the Mahabharata evidence. That's why 23, or now about 60 coming from this. But I'll just mention 6 at the top. So Bhishma fell on the 10th day of the war. War lasted for 18 days. Then the war ended. Then they humbled Ashwatthama the next day. Then they did the Preta Kriya. Then Mahabharata tells us they went to the bank of Ganga and they stayed there for 1 month. This is this Shaucham ni Vartayishanto Masam Ekam Bahi Purat. Outside they lived for 1 month. Then they came back to Hastinapur. Then Rajabhishek took place. Yudhishthir assigned the offices, assigned the post, and Krishna reminded him, hey, we have to go and see Bhishma. When they go after this, so we don't know this middle time from the time they came to Hastinapur and went to see Bhishma. I call these X days, like in a mathematical fashion. And when they went and saw the Bhishma on the Kurukshetra, remember this, this is very important to understand this 58 days. On that day, Krishna tells Bhishma that now you have 56 additional days to live. He says, this middle verse here, Panchashatam Shatchakuru Pravira Shesham Dinanam Tava Jivitasya. Now you 56 additional days are left for you to be on this Sharashaya, which is to say there are 56 additional days to the day of winter solstice, because Bhishma is waiting for Uttarayan, the day of winter solstice. Now, just add those. And again, there is additional evidence. I'll not go into it, that you can take those 56 and split them into 6 and also 50, which is after 6 days, this whole discussion between Yudhishthir and Bhishma takes place. At the last day, 6th day, the Vishnu Sahasranam happens, the day of Vishnu Sahasranama. That was Ekadashi, by the way. Okay, 11th December 5561 BC. And then Yudhishthir goes back to Hastinapur, stays there for 50 days, and comes back when the sun turns northward, Uttarayan, and Bhishma Nirvana happens. Why I'm showing you this? Because that 56 days, when Krishna is saying this, that you have 56 more days, then the day of winter solstice comes. He's referring to winter solstice. Bhishma passes 1 day after the day of winter solstice, because sun has to be truly to the north. I mean, it's just a very basics of astronomy. That is the 58 days that Bhishma is referring to. Ashtapanchashatam Ratri. Okay, so that verse, that particular portion of a reference that Bhishma is referring to, but many Mahabharata researchers thought that is the total duration. Now, I'm going to tell you where this problem possibly started. Again, we are not blaming anyone, because the task is such a daunting task. Okay. Now, remember what happens. This started, this problem possibly, okay, because we don't have evidence before that, started more than 400 years ago, the time of Raja Shivaji. Okay, Nilakanta Chaturdhar, he wrote this Bharata Bhavadipika. And there, I'm not going to walk you through this his translation, but what he did is, when he read this Ashtapanchashatam Ratriam, possibly the first time, I mean, instead of seeing other references, he was convinced this is the duration. So anytime he saw any other reference like this, he tried to modify, twist, and turn. And these are not my words, by the way, that those are his words I'm showing you. If we get a time in the question answer session, I'll walk you exactly what he said. For example, this 56, he said, well, actually it's not 56. It is a 6 times 5, therefore it is 30. And he tried to do all the gimmicks and gymnastics to match it for that 58. And he is not alone. Now, just I'm going to show you the words of Bharat Ratna P.V. Kane, what he has to say about this specific thing that Nilakantha Chaturdhar did. In fact, what Nilakantha Chaturdhar did is great. In fact, he can be said to be one who created critical edition 400 years ago, until Bhandarkar Oriental did in last, 70 years ago or so. So, quickly, in the words of P.V. Kane, Bharat Ratna P.V. Kane, he says these references are so daunting sometimes. So he says Nilakantha, referring to Nilakantha Chaturdhar, he says he puts the most, he meaning Nilakantha, puts the most far-fetched construction of the word Ashtapanchashatam. And even he has done many other things, like the 58 he takes as a 100 minus 58. I'll not go into the details. But the point is, this shows to what level, what extent commentators are reduced when conflicting passages have got to be explained away. And that is the challenge all the current Mahabharata researchers are facing. This another verse, the Bhishma Nirvana happened in the month of Magha. Magoyam samano prapto masa punya yudhishthira tribhaga shesha pakshoyam shuklo bhavitum arhasi. Again, what you are seeing on the left side is the interpretation of Nilakantha Chaturdhar 400 years ago. He put it at Magha Shukla Ashtami, but guess what? That is not the only explanation. In fact, this verse is not there into Mahabharata. This is considered interpolated. Again, many Mahabharata researchers have just taken these and tried to find the dating of Mahabharata. Again, we cannot blame them, but that is because they did not look at all the evidence. For example, I'm just going to go a bit fast to manage time here. You can see a lot of variation as to what could be the tithi of a Bhishma Nirvana. It is not as simple as saying it is a Magha Shukla Ashtami. What you are seeing on the left side is Bharat Ratna P.V. Kane. What you are seeing on the right side is one of the contemporary good Sanskritist, Sri Nityananda Mishra ji. Okay, that is his comment on the left side. It's not that simple. So it is the evidence and cleaning of the evidence that takes time. Once you do that, actually the path is not that difficult. I'm not saying it's easy, not that difficult. I'm going to quickly walk you through this. In researching this, we need these three things. We need a Shraddha. We also need a healthy Sanshay. In a science, we call it devil's advocate. We also need a Jidnyasa, curiosity, and willing to do the tapasya to the answer. Okay. This is the scientific framework. We call it a modern science framework.
Nilesh, I have got a request. Nilesh ji.
Go ahead. Yes, please.
Please do tell us something, the work you have done regarding the change of river courses.
Yes.
Course of Yamuna,
Okay.
how it changed. And about the male-female ratio, which you found out through genes. That may be one of very, very vital evidence. Please don't forget to mention that also.
Okay. And if I go like 10-15 minutes over time, is that okay?
No issue. Please go ahead.
Okay, thank you. So quickly, this is our scientific framework. So now we clean the evidence, guys. Okay. Now the people also, it's very important I make this point, although shortly in a brief, that people, if not just me, when Mahabharata researchers, Ramayana researchers, Rigveda researchers, when they start using the scientific method, they say, come on, that is not the method to be used. We have a different method. We meaning as Indian civilization, not true. In fact, the roots of modern scientific method can be easily, smoothly found in our Darshan Shastra. Professor C.K. Raju, number of you heard his name, and you should invite him for one of your series here. He has written one book called Is the Science Western in Origin? And he says it's not. I mean, of course, the West has made tremendous progress with it, and we should recognize it. There's no point hiding from it. It's not West versus East. I mean, when Shreyash said the Rigveda mantra, right? Prunanto Vishwa Arya, or civilize the whole world, or in Marathi, hey, Vishwachi Maze Ghara. So we are not talking of that dichotomy. We are just talking of the factual things that happen. This scientific method, as the West sees it, can be explained as triangulation of explanation, prediction, testing in the context of a theory, in the context of background knowledge. Technically, that's what it is. In simple language, it means if someone is claiming something, he or she must able to state these 5 things in a very clean and crisp language. in our Darshan Shastra, if you take to Patanjali Yoga Sutra, it says Pratyaksha Anumana Agama Pramanani, or Gotama says Pratyaksha Anumana Upamana Shabda Pramanani. You can see all those words right here. Okay, let's jump into Mahabharata. So we extracted initially 215, now 300 plus. And then Navneet also referred to the 1 year caliper. I'll go fast through it. He made my job easier. What we need to do, this is again a Vijnana Buddhi, scientific acumen, that you can just look at one piece of evidence and go start testing it. No, that's not how it works. You have to look at all the evidence and find the right way to classify. How you classify depends on the discipline of science. In this case, the way it is classified is the one in the blue gives you that approximately right, and the one in the orange is going to help you get precise and accurate. That is what that 1 year caliper example that I was referring to. I'm going to walk you through few, and then as Shuklaji mentioned, I will talk about genetics and river courses also. So quickly on astronomy, again, I'm not going to walk you through the details. I mean, this can be a 1 hour presentation, 1 day long presentation, what I'm going to show on this slide. So if you look in the north direction and if you trace the paths, you see around the pole, all the stars make a path as if like this, going in an anti-clockwise direction in the northern hemisphere. Something wonderful, amazing, mysterious, curious thing that Vyasa is saying in the Mahabharata just before the war began, day before. He says many things, many astronomy observation. This is just one. Yachaisha Visuta Rajas, Trailoke Sadhu Sammata, Arundhati, Teya Pesha, Vasishta, Prushtata, Kruta. Arundhati, the star Arundhati of Saptarshi, is walking ahead of Vasishta. Now, we have to find that evidence that is something we cannot understand with our current understanding. If somebody says, oh, Vyasa saw full moon, what's the big deal? We see full moon every day. But this one is something that we cannot show to be true in our times. If we go back 1,000 years, we cannot show this to be true. 2,000, 3,000, 4,000, 5,000, 6,000 years, this is not true. Surprise, surprise. You know what Bharat Ratna Panduranga Kane said? He said this is something that someone might have inserted afterwards because this is astronomically speaking impossible in the very order of nature. C.V. Vaidya said something similar and many others. P.V. Vartak tried to test it in 3 different ways and failed. And then he wrote it down. Guys, future astronomers, please study this. It will help us understand Mahabharata dating. I studied this for 15 years. By luck, by the grace of Bhagwan and Vyasa and Bhagwan Vyasa, I succeeded. So I'm going to give you a quickly highlight. This is how it looks today. Understand the movement is from the right to the left. It's going anti-clockwise. Very important. Otherwise, you'll confuse. So Vasishta is ahead, Arundhati is behind. That is the case today for last 6,000 years. But there was a time period because of the astronomy phenomenon known as the precession of the Earth's axis, coupled with the something known as the proper motion. Just leave it the technical details away. There are times when they were together, neither ahead nor behind, as seen from the Earth. And this is apparent motion. This is motion we see. They are fixed. We see it because Earth is rotating around the circle, and on the Earth's axis is going like in a top, like a precession. There was it's a year 11,091 they were together. Year 4508 BC they were together. And guess what? In between, during this internal period, actually Arundhati was walking ahead of Vasishta as stated in the Mahabharata text. And not just from that observation, but then 300 plus observation as a solving a jigsaw puzzle. I showed 555-61 BC is the year of Mahabharat War. But the point of this observation is the Mahabharat War can only happen after 11,000 BC and before 4500 BC. That is using the Tarka Shastra, Nyaya. Navneet also mentioned the Bhishma. I'll quickly go through that. So Navneet, you truly helped me. The 10th day of the war, he falls. Margashira Shukla 9 is the earliest possible day that can happen because the war has to begin after the Kartik is over. That based on the Mahabharata references. As I showed, he has to be on the Sharashaya for more than 92 days. It will be a bigger number, but not smaller. And that Bhishma passed away on the day of winter solstice. When we put this together in astronomy fashion, it gives you an interval which is even tighter than given by Arundhati Vasishta. It says Mahabharat War can only happen after 7,000 BC. It can happen only before 4,700 BC. I'm just taking those and summarizing it here on our time axis that I showed you. Just for a reference, I'm showing you where 5561 BC goes. But then there is much additional evidence in Mahabharata It will give you a narrower and narrower bracket, and you can come up with a 1600 period where we should search for the year of Mahabharat War. Then comes the planetary evidence, then comes the river evidence, then comes the climatology evidence, all of this. And again, it verifies 5561 BC. I'm just summarizing. These are the, think of these as different disciplines of science that support 5561 BC. If the evidence exists, if it can be connected to Mahabharat, it can be supported. So let me just complete Ramayana quickly though in 2-3 minutes, and then I'll give you evidence of the rivers in the context of this and also the genetics, and we'll get into question answer. Quickly, Dwarka. So let me mention Shuklaji the Dwarka evidence also, because it is as fascinating as genetic evidence. Now, how do we do it? We have 5561 BC as the year of Mahabharat War. In science, things can be assumed. Okay, they may not be true, but we assume, like, let X be the answer, and then we solve and see if the X is correct. Okay, so suppositions, okay, we can make that. But now 5561 BC is what we came to. If you take another reference from Mahabharata, that Dwarka was flooded and destroyed 36 years after the Mahabharat War, that gives us a prediction for the flooding and destruction of Dwarka 5525 BC. Now the question is there evidence for this? And guess what? There is such a super rich evidence from around the world, of course, and including the west coast of India, Dwarka. If you start all the way in the Caribbean, in the sudden around this time, so 5600 BC plus minus 130 years, that is how research will have always a error bar based on the dating and AMS, how they measure the dating. So the important point is 5525 falls into that. There is a sudden sea level rise in the Caribbean, 7 different locations of 6.5 meters, plus minus 2.5 meters in 5600 BC, plus minus 130, right here. Now you must be wondering why I'm talking of Caribbean. Well, people know cricket and that, but you know, now let's come to Turkey, which is the junction of India, sorry, the Asia and Europe. If you know that geography, the Istanbul, there is a Mediterranean Sea coming to the Aegean Sea, coming to Sea of Marmara, and right at the Bosphorus Channel in Istanbul, the other side is Black Sea. Now it's saltwater sea. Guess what? Do you know when it became saltwater sea? It became saltwater sea in 5550 BC, plus minus 50 years. Suddenly, when the water levels in the oceans were rising, there was a sudden rise, and I'm going to tell you how sudden it was for the Dwarka. The water from Mediterranean, from Atlantic to Mediterranean, Mediterranean to Aegean to Marmara, it broke through the Bosphorus Channel and started pouring on the other side, which was a simple lake before. I'm talking exactly Mahabharata time. And suddenly, instantaneously, it became a saltwater lake. So that flooding was a very significant event, unique event, consistent event. There are many flooding events. Let's come to West Coast. And you see in the Arabian Sea, in the middle of 6th millennium, a sudden rise of 15 meters, 15 meters. This is the study based on 6 to 30 different studies, peer-reviewed papers. It's not new study. It goes back 30 plus years. And very recent study, let me see if I have it. No, I don't have it here. Very recently, last August 2020, the team from Professor Ramasamy from Tamil Nadu, he showed evidence near Pumpuhar, a sudden ingression of water all the way to Mayuram, especially those people who are aware of the Tamil Nadu geography. Right now from Pumpuhar all the way to Mayuram, between 6000 BC to 4000 BC, the water stayed there and then slowly it regressed to where Pumpuhar today. This is very, I don't have the slides today, very consistent. I have given a talk just recently at Sangam called Krishna's Dwarka. I would encourage all of you to watch that. It's very consistent with what you're seeing on the West Coast in 5525 BC. Quickly, Ramayana. 600 plus astronomy evidence, plus oceanography, paleontology, agriculture, hydrology evidence. Again, you are familiar with the timeline now. Now, this is the river evidence. Briefly, I will discuss. The drying of Saraswati actually began after 4500 BC. This is a paper of Anindya Sarkar from 2016, and there are many other papers. I'm just giving you at least one reference. That 7000 BC to 4500 BC was a monsoon became heavy. That explains the 200 plus descriptions of Saraswati from the Mahabharata. Someplace it is flowing beautifully. Other places it has disappeared under the sand. Some places it is flowing inside under the sand. Other places is coming out of the sand. There is already the location where Saraswati has disappeared. It's no longer meeting the sea. Now, if you look at the work of Konde, 2014, 15, 16, 17, 3-4 papers, he has shown that the Grand Saraswati did flow before 10,000 years, but there was no Grand Saraswati in the last 10,000 years. Now, that doesn't mean the Saraswati was not flowing, but it's no longer the Saraswati of a Rigveda, Giribhya Asamudra, or Naditame, Ambitame, Devitame, Saraswati. And you see the change of status of Saraswati being the biggest to now Sindhu being the biggest right in the Rigveda. And where do you see it in Rigveda? In the Nadi Sukta, the 10.75, Mandala 10, Sukta number 75, Nadi Sukta. That is the last mandala of a Rigveda, more than likely written, composed at the time of the Mahabharata. Okay, and that's how with the Vyasa's recasting it went there. Now, those people who ask, what about this 9 million years ago, 1 million years ago, using the Yuga, one of the faulty Yuga theory? That's not the subject today. I have also discussed that elsewhere. 1 million years ago, Ramayana happening. Guess what? Ramayana talks of Yamuna meeting Ganga multiple times. Even Kumbhakarna talks about it, giving a metaphor. Now, modern research tells us, and it's a very solid research, 30, 40, 50 plus publications we are referring to, both done in India and outside. Yamuna meeting Ganga happened only after 50,000 years. So when those 6 plus descriptions of Valmiki Ramayana, of course Mahabharata, but Mahabharata is not issue here, they can only be validated after 50,000 BC. So that gives us these bounds, that approximately right that I'm talking about. One more thing quickly, and again, Shuklaji reminded me, when Bharat is coming back, he refers to Satluj River, and he says that Satluj River flowing with huge quantity of water, copious quantity of water, flowing in the west direction. Now, why is this such a big deal? Because that modern research, this is from IIT Kanpur, Singh and the whole team, as 2017 paper. It shows that Satluj turned sharp west suddenly, instantaneously, so to say, and that happened in 13,000 BCE. So that also gives the upper limit for Ramayana. And quickly, I'm going to walk you through the astronomy descriptions without going into the details. There are 600 plus astronomy evidence in Valmiki Ramayana. If we just look at few, it immediately gives you a time bracket. Sun setting near Pushya during Hemanta from Aranyakanda gives you that bracket of 17,500 to 10,500. Ashwina occurring during the spring, or Chaitra occurring during the Sharad, or Brahma Rashi, which is same as Abhijit, same as Vega, becoming a North Pole star, is all taking you that time period of 10,000 to 14,000 years. And then additional evidence, 300 plus, 400 plus, takes you to 12,209, like solving a jigsaw puzzle. I will go fast through this. There are 6 references. There are many references. If you just pull 6 references from Valmiki Ramayana, all of them astronomy in nature, it's such a beautiful thing. This is also validated, especially the 2 pole stars, exact pole stars, validated in Surya Siddhanta. Now, Surya Siddhanta has some additional references that has nothing to do with Ramayana, but when you match with those 2 pole star, it takes you to 12,000 BCE. And guess what? Valmiki Ramayana is describing these 2 pole stars of Ramayana times. Brahma Rashir Vishuddhasya, Shuddhasya Paramarshya, Archishmantah Prakashante, Dhruvam Sarve Pradakshanam in the north. And in the south, Sugriva says you have to go all the way to the end of southern India before you can see the star Agastya. And why is that? Because he says it has gone inside the ocean. You might have heard the story of Agastya drinking the ocean and so on and so forth. That's another subject. But there are references, astronomy references in the Ramayana that show you the 4 cardinal points, the solstices and equinoxes, and all of them take you to 13th millennium BC. If you're looking for archaeology evidence, people think only in terms of pots and pans. But guess what? This structure is in Peru, southern South America, on the west coast of Peru. And when Spaniards went there and asked the locals, like, did you build it? They said, no, we did not build it. Our forefathers did not build it. We don't know who built it. They said, any idea why it was built? No idea. Now, I'm going to just quickly jump ship. So some of you may be startled, but I have given a series of talks called Sugriva's Atlas, and I will encourage you to watch those. Then you will see the connection of this. when Sugriva sends the party in the east direction, Vanara party, he gives them the GPS marks, he say, after that you see this, and so on. He's not asking them to go to South America. He says, if you go in the east direction, this is the end of it. Guess what? In the Valmiki Ramayana description, it tells you what it is. Not only that, but why it was built, when it was built, who built it. त्रिशिरा कांचनस्केतु स्थालस्तस्य महात्मना स्थापित पर्वतस्य अग्रे विराजति सवेदिका. Trishira, trident like structure. Kanchana, golden. Ketu, like a flag, okay, like a tala vruksha, okay, like a coconut or a palm tree. Mahatmana stapita parvatasya agre, established, created at the surface of the mountain. Virajati savedika, like Pandit Veda Bhumi karte na. So like they will make a rectangle and stuff like that with the water or with the rice and whatnot. You see a rectangle at the bottom. Next verse tells you who created it, why it was created. Purvasya Adishi Nirmanam Krutam Tat Tridasheshware. Tridasheshware is taken as a Indra. He's the Swami of east direction, but also because he's at east, he can look at the north and he can look at the south, right from the equator, so to say. So Tridasha, that's why three directions. And Purvasya Dishi Nirmanam, just like we have an international day line, this is saying this is the end of the east, okay, of a Ramayana time. Okay, I'll go fast to this. Now, Ramayana also describes elephants like creature with four tusks guarding the Pushpak Viman, and Pushpak Viman is a big subject of, it unsettles people. I'm not going to discuss Pushpak Viman unless it comes in a question answer. But people said, what is this? I mean, Western people say, what are these guys talking? Ramayana. Now we know, last 200, 300 years, that there were actually creatures, elephant-like creatures with 2, 3, and 4 tusks. And therefore, they were found, fossils are found all around the world. And guess what? They existed 9 million years ago, but they existed until 11,000 BP, until 9,000 BC. Now, remember, that is not to say they may not have existed afterwards. But my point is, it corroborates Ramayana times of 12,000. Definitely, it corroborates that evidence. Last one. I gave a talk on this Sugriva's Atlas in Seattle last year or so, almost a year ago. And somebody asked me, but where is the evidence of Ravana going around the world in navigation? And where is the evidence of ports and boats and everything? Now, remember, as we go back in time, the evidence gets less and less. But this paper, Professor Ramaswamy, this is in Current Science, 10 August 2020. What it shows? Actually, there may be more evidence going back, but it has gone now. It has been disappeared. But the evidence that exists shows existence of very good ports, port structure, everything. Now that is inside the ocean, because this vertical line is where Pumpu are now, and everything else to the right is the ocean. But going back to 20,000 BC, there were ports there. This last thing, that grayish thing you see, was the port that existed before 16,000 BC. It got flooded sometime after 16,000 BC. Then there's another port that got flooded another time, and then 6,000 BC, that Mahabharata times, another flood, water came all the way to Myra. Okay. Again, Ramayana has evidence, not only astronomy. We start with astronomy because it allows us to define precise and accurate. Only astronomy can do that. And of course, assuming we are lucky, and we are lucky because of the great rishis like Vyasadeva and Valmiki, because they had that foresight, wisdom to embed these kind of references into their narrations of Ramayana and Mahabharata. And that's why we can do it. If that was not there, no, we would have just said, okay, that's great things that happened in the past, and let's use them for our benefit, because that is the benefit of Ityasa. Dharmartha kama mokshanam upadesham samanvitam purvavrittam kathayuktam itihasam prachakshate. So we would have still used it. We are so lucky that we can actually find the exact timing. These are my books. If you are in India, then you can get into the details of the actual evidence and so on. If you are outside, these are the books on Amazon. Quick summary. And then Shuklaji, I have not forgotten. I will mention the genetic one. Epic evidence, it is overwhelming, it is daunting, it is vast, it is conflicting. That is one of the reasons why you see people sometimes going with different dates. Some researchers confuse that, and they say because using, say, astronomy evidence or hydrology evidence, people reach different dates, therefore the evidence cannot be trusted. That is not correct. In fact, it is a very foolish thinking. Now, they could have been right because the evidence may not be sufficient to bring us the date, But the reason people go to different dates, I gave you a couple examples, like Ashta Panchashatam Ratram or Magha Shukla Ashtami. See, some of these verses have multiple interpretations, and one may take one interpretation and may reach the other date. However, if you are savvy enough to take all the evidence together, like, in science, we use the term verisimilitude score or truth likeness score, just like tennis. If you see the match, like both parties do score points. Like one person may score 16 points, another person may score 100 points. So we say 100 to 16, or in a tennis, we'll say 6-1, 6-0, 6-2. But we can still declare a winner. Just because the other party also threw some shots doesn't mean we cannot declare a winner. Same thing, there will be, and this is not, I'm talking two different researchers. I'm saying there could be some evidence which may appear conflicting because it has multiple interpretations. Extracting, classifying, grading, sequencing is the critical part. Then, of course, objective testing, using empirical method comes next. And this is not limited to astronomy. I showed you oceanography. I showed you, what else I showed? The paleontology, like the elephants, archaeology, like the trident structure. The rewards are great if you do this. Don't think this is something that person does it in 3 months, 4 months, 1 year, 2 years. No. I mean, sometime you may be lucky, but we're talking of tapa, that's why the tapa was 12 years at least, we're talking of 10, 20, 30 years of research work done by every individual. Precise and accurate dating is possible. Multidisciplinary evidence from multiple sciences indeed validates this dating. And I can just talk for myself. I mean, again, number of names that you mentioned, Navneet like Saroj Balaji, Vedvir Arya one more name you mentioned. Pushkar Bhatnagar I could never meet. By the way, I was trying to reach him when I was researching. And very sad story. I mean, Pushkar Bhatnagar story. I mean, he had a cancer and he passed away. His daughter responded to me, but unfortunately with the bad news that he had passed away. But I wanted to discuss with him. Saroj Bala and I have presented together at Waves conference before. Vedvir Arya and I have invited him to many conferences to present before. Okay. All right. So this is my last slide. Quickly, I'm going to stop sharing, and then I'll say this genetic evidence, and we can get into question answers. Quickly, Shuklaji said, requested me to mention the genetic evidence. This is again fascinating as the astronomy evidence, but as fascinating as the Dwarka oceanography evidence, I said. Let me make it as simple as possible. What happened during the Mahabharat War? And because this is not interactive, not everyone can participate, I'll just give the answer myself. People from all parts of India, but also the surroundings. And remember, the India of that time, it actually goes from like Turkey, Iran, at least Iran, Iraq also. Iraq is a Bhagadatta, but that's a different discussion. All the way to what we call now Myanmar, to Thailand, Indonesia, Laos and that area. That is definitely the case. Also, Uttara Kuru, Uttara Madhra, we have a Shalya and all those people, and that is now the modern day areas east of Caspian Sea. So you just don't think of today's India, right? It's a very broad area around India that people had come. Exclusively, they were men, at least those who fought and died. Significant number of them, most of them died. Okay, something interesting. So just like we say, Dwarka flooded, is there evidence? If we ask now, this huge genetic, huge exclusive male population died. Can we see the effects of that? Now we don't know, because in order to know that, first thing, we need some evidence, but we also need to know the total population. Guess what? We don't know the total population. We can make a guesstimate, and I have given a separate talk on that. But what is interesting is, in 2015, many years after my research work was done, a genetic paper came, Monica Carmine, and you can check that paper. I have given at least few talks on this. What it said, something very interesting. So I will, before giving the details, I'll give you a metaphor of an earthquake. Suppose you hear of a news of an earthquake somewhere. What are the 2 or 3 things that you want to know about that earthquake event? One thing is you want to know where it happened. Second thing, you want to know when it happened. And the third thing, you want to possibly know how severe it was. What was the Richter scale? Okay, these are typically the 3 things you want to know, right? Guess what? Now take that metaphor, bring it to this genetics earthquake. Suddenly, a huge, significant portion of the world's population, exclusively male, have died. What kind of effect it might have on the progeny? Monica Carmen's paper tells us three things. I'm going to quickly summarize in 1 minute. That there was sometime in the past a sudden imbalance between the ratio of the genetic variation. Don't confuse that with the population for a minute. Is the genetic variations of the female gene, mitochondrial DNA, they can call it female gene, to male gene. There was a sudden imbalance. How much was that imbalance? Compare that with the Richter scale of the earthquake. She says, or her paper says, the many authors there, that ratio was 16 or 17:1, meaning the variation among the female gene side was say 17, and we are not talking linear, we are talking a geometric type of description. 17:1. So the male variation has shrunk into the progeny, because that's how we are measuring it, by genetic code and genetic timing of the progeny. So think of this as a Richter scale. So the variation is 16:1. Variation among women 16, men is only 1 as a reference point. So that's like Richter scale. Now, where did it happen? Guess what? The effects can be seen around the world, but the deepest, the earliest effect, the deepest effect, and the last one to recover from this genetic imbalance, guess what, guys? India. South Asia, they say that is a wrong word. It's India. I mean, they refer to India, they call it South Asia. That's the wrong terminology. India. So where it happened, India, what happened? A significant imbalance between female variation in the gene versus male variation in the gene. And the last question, when did it happen? Are you ready? Monica Carmen paper says it happened 7,500 years ago. And if I had the slides, and I don't know if I have them, possibly not, but please see my talks. So it happened, the deepest impact, earliest impact, and the last one to recover is India. What happened? The Richter scale equivalent is 16:1 variation in the female gene diversity versus the male reference gene diversity. And it happened 7,500 years ago. Folks, that is the time of the Mahabharat War. So with that, thank you so much for listening to me. And if we have a time, we will have some question, answers, comments, objections, anything like that. Thank you.
धन्यवाद सर, बहुत ही अच्छी तरीके से और प्रेजेंटेशन के साथ हमें बहुत सारी बातें पता चली। कुछ क्वेश्चंस आए हैं, उनकी ओर ध्यान देते हैं। एक क्वेश्चन आया है कि सर, हाउ एंशिएंट ग्रीक्स केम टू नो अबाउट इंडिया?
Okay, very good question. So ancient Greeks, we have to see how old are ancient Greeks. We'll start with their records, meaning the Western research into archaeology and other things. The peak of our Greek culture is seen as like 500 BCE. This is the time of 600 BC, maybe Thales, then Anaximander, Xenophanes, and followed by Plato and Socrates and Aristotle coming to like 200 BC and so on. If you go back, certain the precursor to Greeks that can go to 800 BC, like a Troy is now identified around 800 to 1200 BC, and possibly some other culture, I forgot the name now, starts with M, goes back to say 1600 BC max. So how they came to know of India, the records that we're talking, such as Megasthenes, that is attributed to Greeks. See, Greeks were all the way up to Iran, and that time Iran is India. Don't forget that. And so through that interaction, also Rome, Greeks, they were doing business with India through sea, ocean, for a long time. So these are different routes. Now the Alexander's, invasion in India, and then possibly related to that, some documents that they collected, Megasthenes, which is now the original text is lost, but Strabo and Pliny and all that has taken this. So that is how the information comes to us. The Greek, how Greek received information about India, and it is a mixed baggage. It's like a gold mine. There is no pure gold there in their records. It is a mixed baggage. Thank you.
Yes, sir. One more question. What about the dating given in Srimad Bhagavad Mahapuran that Ikshvaku Vamsha is 9 lakhs years ago? So the aging of Ram would go to 7 lakh years. So what is your opinion about it?
Okay. First thing, I would like to see where that reference in the Bhagavad Purana is. I do not think there is such a clear reference. Now, there might be, but I do not think so. Also, what happens is there may be something mention of Ramayana as a Treta Yuga. Many times what people do is, as soon as they hear the word Treta Yuga, now this is not only limited to Bhagavad Purana, it is limited to all Purana. It is applies to all Puranas. As soon as, and Mahabharata discusses Yuga, like this is at the Sandhi of Dwapar and Kali, or Ramayana happen in Treta Yuga. But in Purana, what happens is, or even otherwise, as soon as we, any one of us, hears a Treta Yuga, immediately we go and say, Kali Yuga 432,000, Dwapar Yuga is twice that, that is 864,000. So minimum Ramayana in the Treta Yuga has to be before 1 million years. The problem with that, I have discussed it elsewhere. I'm going to give a very short answer. Yuga simply means a period of time, but once that definition is understood, there are different types of yuga. I have classified them into 4 categories. There is a theoretical yuga, there is a practical yuga, there is a philosophical yuga, and there is a chronological yuga. The problem that we see of these huge time spans of 432,000, 864,000 yuga, kalpa, mahayuga, these are the timelines, theoretical yuga, to describe evolution. Like our Matsya Kurma Varaha Nrsimha is a metaphor for evolution, for example. Or there is a biological evolution, but there is also a geological evolution. But somewhere somebody made a mistake, I would say actually a blunder, that somebody took a theoretical definition, and I'm going to give you the basis for theoretical definition in a minute, and very wrongly applied for chronology of our historical events, and that has created this chaos. Now, where does this 432,864 or 4.32 million years of Mahayuga comes from? You will not find the true definition in Purana anywhere. Purana simply pulls that information, says 432,000, doesn't tell you where it comes from. Surya Siddhanta or Aryabhatiya will tell you where it comes from. It is a mathematical formulation, just like remember the vernier caliper. Like why we have the secondary scale, that we have to take a reading which line matches and then multiply by the error bar, and that gives us a reading. It's something like that. The rotations for each orbit, for each planets are given in this mathematical number of 4.32 million years. Why such a big number? Because that allows you to state the orbital period of each planet without using the fraction, or rather saying that it is used in such a way that you will not make error because of giving the number in a fraction. I have given a whole talk on this, the mystery of 4.32 million years of Mahayuga. So that is the basics. That is meant for knowing the precise and accurate orbital period of planets. It has nothing, absolutely nothing to do with using that time span to measure our chronological history. And that is the reason why somebody will take some reference from Bhagavad Puran and say it's happened 9 million years ago. Thank you.
Yes, sir. Yes, please.
Navneet ji.
Nilesh, just one small thought which came to my mind while I was listening to your talk. I remember when Saroj Balaji gave her presentation in Traditional Academy and an exhibition was held. That time, Dr. Krishna Gopalji, Sanchalak of Vatsa, made a very interesting observation which stuck to my mind. He said that it is a question for linguists that Sanskrit as a language, how much time it would have taken Sanskrit to evolve till the time the Vedas were composed, and one of the Vedas was had the meter and syntax that it could be sung, and it is still being sung in the same manner. And there were different chandas, and Anushtup Chand being the most popular, having 4 lines and 13 letters. How much time would have taken for a language to evolve to such level that Sanskrit did when Vedas were composed, can linguistics also become a source and validate the theories that you have propounded?
Okay, great question. And Navneet ji, I have the same curiosity, I would say, question and therefore a curiosity. And I have asked to at least, I would say, a dozen plus, at least close to 15 Sanskritist who are very good. I mean, I will state few names. And I would be happy to say some names. I mean, all of them I may not remember. But for example, Professor V.N. Jha from Pune, or Professor Gauri Mahulikar, and few others, and many others. But what the common answer that I have received, and I understand why that is so, that they say in some case the language can get frozen. So like a technical language, like a computer language, that can stay that way for a long time. Like a Fortran programming possibly still might be done the same way if somebody does Fortran. So similarly, the Rigveda had certain purpose that they were so much I mean, the way Shreyash ji recited it, like it has to be done in the right way. I mean, we will look. I mean, if I say something, Shreyash ji would laugh at it. Says you don't know how to even say it. So it is to be said in a certain way. So sometime it can be frozen for a long time. So the time may go by and it can be frozen. So that is one possibility. That's the answer I have received. And then we can talk of relative chronology of a language. So they say the Ramayana comes out much simpler. By the time Mahabharata, it gets more sophisticated in some fashion. Now, sophisticated may not be the right word. Let's say it's different. Okay, somewhat complicated way. Ramayana we understand a lot easily. Valmiki Ramayana compared to Mahabharata. That is our experience, even when we don't know much Sanskrit. Rigveda, I mean, Suresh ji would tell us, it's like next to impossible. I have to sit with 3-4 different translations, and I should thank the government appropriate department for IGNCA has a site, the Vedic Heritage Portal. What a beautiful collection. If anything required, it needs to be communicated. Because, when I tell people, they say, my God, Nilesh, you are my hero. I said, I'm not the hero. It is the government who has done a good job there, IGNCA. People simply don't know about it. So I have to look at 3-4 translations. So quickly to answer your question, I have asked this question. I don't know the answer myself. They have said sometimes the language can go for a long time without change. And at least based on the evidence, we can only talk of relative chronology. The linguists don't have any tools to define the absolute chronology to tell how long certain changes might have taken place.
Navneet, I would like to say a couple of words here. Presently, we are doing a job of understanding if Rigved refers to Ayurveda or to Paryavaran or to, say, democracy. And the same thing is being referred in Ajurveda. So how the meter changes and how much time it could have taken. So we may take about 3 to 4 months before we come out with categorical answer, but hopefully we shall be in a position to identify the difference. I'm not saying timing. It may be X time, but what we'll say is after X years, Ajurveda came into being. Thereafter, Y years and Samved, and Atharved much later, much later. So that sort of thing we have already taken. And beautifully, what happens? The same thing which is being referred in Ajurveda on a particular subject, and it was referred already in the Rigveda. So there's a lot of difference between the meter and the style. So that also categorically demonstrates there has been a lot of time during which the treatment of subject, its understanding changed a lot. So if that is done, at least we shall be in a position to say the difference between 4 Vedas, particularly 3 first. Because what I understand, after Gita only, the Atharved got its prominence. Otherwise, they were referring to Triveda. So that is another point. But nonetheless, this is a huge task. And Nilesh, true to your name, Nilesh and Nilkant, Krishna and Shiva together. तो आपने भगवान कृष्ण की तरीके लालित्य था, माधुर्य था, और शिव जी की तरीके से स्टेट फैक्ट्स. लेकिन अभी हमारा काम काफी पड़ा हुआ है. and we shall be referring to you again. Whatever facts you have said today, we shall also try to match the data given by Mr. Vedvir Arya. We shall also try to take data from Saroj Balaji and try to match. Wherever there is a unanimity, there is no problem. And wherever there is difference, so our job would be to ensure that why the difference is there. If the same shloka is taken by 3-4 persons and the 4 are authorities, why there is change? So we shall work on that and try to bridge this gap. And we shall be referring to you, to Mr. Vedvir Arya, to Ms. Saroj Bala and others also, whosoever is there. And after having 2-3 rounds of discussion with all of us, we shall try to come out with a date which is acceptable to all. Or if not date, at least the interpretation of that particular shloka. For example, the use quoted a very good thing, and which is being used by so many persons for describing the national catastrophe, that whenever Rohini is being afflicted with Saturn, these things happen. So this data is available. We can match the data with others. And so much work has been done on this also. Similarly, the Mars and Ketu, which is referred in Mahabharata, in what manner they formed a yuti, because of which the war has taken place. And it was simplified by another poet, Ghag. He says very simple, Ek mas do gahna, Raja Maria Sena. That means if there is a 2 grahan in one Hindu month, so either the king will die or the entire this thing. So he concluded this based on this Mars, Ketu and Saturn only. So we have to work further on it and to ensure that the interpretation taken by you of any particular shloka, taken by Mr. Vedvir Arya and by Saroj Bala. Where is the difference? If a particular word has been taken by you to denote, say, Mars, Ketu affect each other, and Madam Saroj Bala says no, here what they refer is Mars and say Saturn, just for an example. So we should try to see where from this word has come. So we shall take help of linguists and try to see that only one interpretation given for every shloka by all of us. And thereafter, hopefully, we shall be in a position to say categorically, Mahabharata happened at this date. Like your 2 datas, change of course of rivers, it's a hard fact. Nobody can deny that. Similarly, the fall in the ratio of male-female is a hard fact, can't be denied. But then we have to match with this thing. Regarding this Dwarka, there are number of opinions from 3000 BC to more and more, because further and further expression to be done. Jab tak pura expression ho nahi jaye, nothing can be certainty. But at least the Mahabharata is there, the shlokas are there, and every shloka can have only one interpretation if seen in proper order. क्या होता है, एक ही श्लोक पढ़ रहे हैं, हमने विभक्ति लगा दी या उसका करण या अपादान कोई गड़बड़ कर दिया, अर्थ बदल जाएगा. और आजकल हम यही रोज करते हैं. एवरी डे 1 आवर हम सब पूरी टीम बैठ के देखते हैं, इस एक पर्टिकुलर शब्द में अगर आपने कोई उपादान या कोई करण बदल दिया तो पूरा अर्थ बदल जाएगा, पूरा अर्थ बदल जाएगा उसका. तो इसलिए आजकल हम उसको देख करके और बड़ा इंटरेस्टिंग फैक्ट सामने आते हैं कि कैसे कैसे अर्थ बदलता है और इंटरप्रेट कहीं कहीं हो जाता है. जैसे उनका मूले मूला भावात, अमूलम मूलम, इसी के डिफरेंट इंटरप्रेट दर्शन में आ जाते हैं और अलग अलग तरीके अलग यूज करते हैं. या जैसे भगवत गीता का ये है, किस वजह से उन्होंने कहा कि मासों में मैं मार्गशीर्ष हूँ, व्हाट वाज इंपॉर्टेंट मार्क्स एट दैट पर्टिकुलर टाइम. तो उस टाइम पे मार्क्सिस की ब्यूटी बड़ा क्लियर हो जाएगी. द्वितीय कुसुमाकर, एक तो कुसुमाकर पे आ रहे हैं, दैट मींस ही इज कमिंग टुवर्ड्स मार्च अप्रैल दिस of today's standard, and again he's going towards this September, October. So that we have to see by what time it might have changed. So we shall do a little work on it, then we shall come back to you, and hopefully then we shall have another round of discussion, and we shall look at Navneet ji also to join, so that we can give a final touch to this thing. Thank you very much. आपने कृष्ण और शिव दोनों रूल अदा कर दिया, और नवनीत तो नवनीत के कहोगे, इनको भाई मेरे भाई हैं, मोर देन दैट. और नवनीत जी आज तबियत ठीक नहीं थी, मैं बिल्कुल उठने वाला नहीं था। मैं दिल्ली सुबह से लेटा था, अभी उठा हूँ आपका चेहरा देखने के लिए। अभी भी मैं बोलने की पोजीशन नहीं था, और मैं प्रोफेसर साहब मुझे कह रहा भाई आप इसको कंक्लूड करिए नहीं किया तो मुझे जबरदस्ती बोलना पड़ा एफर्ट करके। थैंक यू वेरी मच, वी रियली एंजॉयड इट एंड होप टू सी यू अगेन। नमस्कार।
धन्यवाद सर। इसी के साथ हम हमारा समापन करते हैं। जैसे कि कहा गया है, इतिहास पुराणाभ्याम वेदम समुपगुम्हते। अभी सर ने कहा कि अम्बी तमे नदी तमे देवी तमे सरस्वती अप्रशस्ता इव स्मसि प्रशस्तिमं वनस्पति। केवल वेद पढ़ने से नहीं, उसका विस्तार करना हो तो हमें आज के जैसे नवनीत सोनी जी अतिथि है और आज के हमारे प्रमुख वक्ता नीलेश जी, इनके साथ पुराण और इतिहास का भी अध्ययन करना चाहिए, तभी वेद का अर्थ सामने आएगा। और इसी के साथ हमारे शुक्ला सर और सहस्त्रबुद्धे जी योजक सत्र दुर्लभः, तो एक योजना अभी बन गई है जो अभी सर ने बनाई, तो इसी को आगे बढ़ाएंगे। और इसी साधु के साथ और आप व्यक्त हूँ AICTE था ज्ञान जिन्होंने इस कार्य के लिए अथक प्रयत्न किए, उन सभी का धन्यवाद करता हूँ। विशेष रूप से इस कार्यक्रम में जुड़े और जिज्ञासा से जो बहुत सारे प्रश्न आए थे। ज्ञान तो अथांग है, किंतु हमें ही समय की मर्यादा है, इसलिए बहुत सारे क्वेश्चन नहीं ले सके।
अभय जेरे का जरूर धन्यवाद करो। अभय जेरे ने ही मिलवाया है, बात कराई, तो अभय जेरे मत भूलो। सबसे पहले धन्यवाद, मेरी गलती, आई फॉरगॉट टू थैंक हिम। सो अभय जेरे ने इंट्रोड्यूस कराया है, तो फर्स्ट थैंक्स गोस टू अभय जेरे जी। चलिए उससे मिलकर पर्सनली बात करूँ, ठीक है
सर। सभी ज्ञात अज्ञात सभी का धन्यवाद करता हूँ और यह कार्यक्रम संपन्न हुआ ऐसा जाहिर करता हूँ। नमस्ते।
और सहस्रबुद्धे जी की छत्रछाया में हुआ है, उनका धन्यवाद तो रहेगा वो तो सदैव रहेगा, उसको छोड़ ही सकते हम लोग। ठीक है,
नमस्कार। थैंक यू एवरीवन।